Okay, good afternoon, everyone. To those who are online and to Eileen who made it in person, thanks for coming in. So we're gonna share today is Wednesday. It is the 28th of January. We're getting ready for Parshas Beshalach, also referred to as Shabbat, and we're braving the storm, and we're going to share some Divrei Torah on the Parsha that hopefully will make it more meaningful. So let's see. I think we're going to have time for three Divrei Torah today. So let's start. We'll start on page,
Let me get out of here.
so on page one. Here we go. Page one. So it says right at the beginning of the parsha, it begins, "Vayehi b'shalach Paro es ha'am." So it was that when Paro sent out, hey Shelley, that is when Paro sent out the nation. So it says, "V'lo nacham Elokim derech eretz plishtim." God did not want to take them the direct route into Israel. In other words, if they would leave Egypt and go through along the coast, go through the region of the Plishtim. Ki karovhu, despite the fact that it was so close. Ki amar Elokim, because God said, Pen yinachem ha'am b'rasam milchama v'shavu v'mitzrayma, that maybe they'll panic when they start to see war coming from the Plishtim, and if they know it's an easy route that got them there, it's also an easy route to get back. So they'll panic and they'll say, we want to go back to Egypt. So therefore, what did God do? Yud Ches, v'yasev Elokim es ha'am derech hamidbar yam suf. God instead took him on this circuitous route along the Red Sea, and it says v'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. And last it says that b'nei Yisrael left chamushim. So the simple definition means that they left armed. They had some weapons with them because they were prepared for what may lay ahead when they were going to be leaving. That's what the pasuk says. So we're going to start today. We're going to see hopefully three insights from Rav Sorotzkin. Rav Zalman Sorotzkin. We enjoy his commentary very much. I've been enjoying it. I've been enjoying sharing it. So we're going to see three. So let's see the first one. The first one is going on this idea that says that God wanted to take them on this circuitous route because he was nervous that if there was such a close and easy way to get back to Mitzrayim, to get back to Egypt, then as soon as they experienced trouble, as soon as they experienced any fighting with the Plishtim, their gut reaction would be, let's go back to Mitzrayim. So let's see what Sorotzkin comments here. He says, Bishalach Paro, it was when Paro sent them out. It didn't say Vayigaresh. Bishalach makes it sound like a more dignified way that they were sent out. Lashon Levaya, it almost sounds like they were escorted out. Shalivo some derech kavod. He's quoting a Mechilta, a medrash that says that the wording is very precise. That the Torah picked a word, Bishalach, was when Paro Bishalach sent them out with dignity, like they were almost escorted out of Egypt, rather than saying they were spat out or something like that. It's a more respectful term. So what does that mechilta mean? That Paro escorted them out? What does that mean? So let's see how that's what he's going to want to explain. He says, Kvar Be'arnu, we've already explained Besof Parsha Shmos, at the end of the Parsha of Shmos, She'im Gezeras HaTeven Nase Matzav B'nei Yisrael B'Mitzrayim Kashmod. When the Egyptians said we're no longer going to supply straw to make the bricks, the position of the Jews in Egypt became very, very difficult. Ad Belina, so almost it was too difficult to bear because they had the same quota of bricks they had to make, but they didn't have the supply of the straw. They had to fend for themselves. Ad Belina, so let's say Cherav B'Yadam Largenu, to the point where the Jewish Shotrim said, it's like you've given a sword in the hands of the Egyptians to smite us. Umeis Hashem Haisazos. Sorotzkin says this was all part of God's plan. That the fact to make that they no longer could tolerate their existence in Egypt. Why? This would make it easier for anyone who was on the fence, wondering, well, should we leave? It's always a difficult request to give up your what's known and to tell people, an entire people, that you're going to leave Egypt and leave your familiar territory and leave your homes and leave, all the shopping that whatever it is. They didn't have it so good; they were slaves, but it's still what was familiar to them. So this was part of God's plan. He wanted to make it worse before it got better. Why? Because now more people were likely to follow Moshe when he says we got to leave here and go into the midbar. Because if there was any way that they could feel we could possibly make it and stay in Egypt, some would have chosen that. But by the fact that it was made so difficult for them, that made it easier for many people who could have been on the fence to now take that leap of faith and leave. That's Sorotskin's theory. Mesa Shemai Zos, this was part of God's plan. Kadesh Yaskimu Kulam Lazovas Batem, that they would all, as the greatest number of Jews, would agree to leave their homes. V'chol Asher Lahem b'Mitzrayim, and everything that they had gotten used to in Egypt. Habrucha in ours, Egypt, which was like, again, even though they didn't have it so good, it still was a settled society. Midbar, and to go out into the frontier, into the bitter wilderness, Hanora below Mazon, without any food, of lo shum cheshbon, and without any plan about how they could possibly survive, it becomes a little bit easier when your existence in Egypt is miserable. In other words, if it's tolerable in Egypt, more people would have opted to stay. But if it's an intolerable existence in Egypt, then it becomes easier to decide to leave. Besides for the fact that making a decision to leave means freeing themselves from their masters, their very difficult and harsh masters, and the tough work that they had to do. It never would have entered anyone's mind that anyone would have wanted to return to Egypt. So, in other words, what Rav Sorotzky is pointing out is, look at the amazing thing we're seeing at the beginning of Parshas Beshalach. We already know, he says, I've already explained at the end of Parshas Shemos, that it was part of God's plan to make it so miserable and intolerable in Egypt, that way they'd just be itching to leave and it wouldn't be a challenge to leave. But no, what does our Parsha begin with? That Hashem, when he takes him out of Egypt, he specifically takes him on a circuitous way to make it that no one's going to want to return if we got to face war. So what does that mean? Even though it was so bad, and God made it so bad in Egypt that it wouldn't be such a necessary and it wouldn't be such a challenge to leave when the time came. When we experienced hardships on the way because of war with the Plishtim, there still might be people who want to run back. And as he says, that's amazing. How do you understand that mindset? Aval Mekivan Shebiyomim Achronim. He goes, the only way to explain it is since in their final moments in Egypt, their final day in Egypt, Heru Lahem HaMitzrim Simanei Yedidus. When the Egyptians finally sent them out, they sent them Beshalach, like that Medrash says. They sent them in a more dignified type of leaving. They didn't spit them out. They escorted them out. They showed them some degree of Yedidus, some degree of friendship, some degree of warmth. Vireus, some degree of friendship, Veshilu klei kesef v'lazav, and they even lent them their gold and silver as reparations, but they said we're just borrowing it. V'achrona halach Paro ba'atzmo vosam ubikesh me'Moshe v'Aaron, and Paro himself escorted them out, like walked them out. That's Beshalach. He sent them out, and he asked of Moshe and Aaron, uvirachtem gamosi, give me a bracha before you leave, because he says he was a firstborn too. He didn't want to die. He says, give me a bracha too. So he says their final vision, the final mind's eye they had of their experience in Egypt was one that was some degree of camaraderie. And he says, and that's human mindset. We could ignore all of our experiences and just remember that final picture. He goes, Vized Darkenu, that's our way. That's the way that we're hardwired as people. That's the way we behave as Jews. Kesalanu lishkoach maheres ha'avel. It is so easy to forget the misery and the injustice that we experience. Hanasalanu alidei umas olam. It's far too easy for us to forget the horrible way we were treated by some of the nations of the world. V'dayarak ha'aras panim kala mitzidam. All it takes is them showing us the slightest degree of friendship, kedei shena'amin, in order to cause us to believe, shenasu lanu avim v'reim. They're now our best friends, our dearest comrades. And that's what the pasuk's telling us. Beshalach Paro Asam, that it was when Paro sent us out with some degree of niceness, that he escorted us out, that we went out in some degree of dignity. Hayakvar Kayim Chshash. Now there is a real fear, Shem Yifkeshu al Darkam Eze Michshol, that if we face some challenge on our way, the Plishtim attack us, something like that, Magam Milchama, some type of fight, Yeshuva Mitzrayim. Now people might return. So he's saying it's a wild human dynamic. We were made miserable, and God specifically wanted it that our end in Egypt should be so miserable that it shouldn't be such a challenge to leave. But with all that, all it took was Paro being nice to us on our way out the door, and people could forget all of the bad, all of the horrible way that we were treated there. And now, if we experience something bad from the Plishtim, people might run back. So God says, in order to prevent that, I've got to take them on a more circuitous route. It is so wild how the human mind could be so fickle. But he says, but that's the reality. That's how we are, how quick we are to forget. He goes, Lefichach, that's why the Torah says, Vayasev Elokim Asam, God took us on a circuitous route, Hanirgash Me'akavod she'asa lo Paro, because God understood, since Paro gave us some covet at the end, that could ruin everything that he had put into place about that, get it out of our mindset that we never wanted to go into Egypt, back to Egypt. Therefore, he had to take us Derech HaMidbar. He had to take us on that more circuitous route. So Sorotsky is pointing out that this seems unbelievable, but he says we've seen this play itself out in human history, in Jewish history, how quick we are to forget, how miserable we could have been treated by places, and if they show us some degree of dignity, now all of a sudden I can't help but think about this. Every now and then you read reports. I never wanted to do this. I would never do this. But you see these reports every now and then about people going on, let's say, vacation to some places that treated us absolutely horrible. And my gut reaction is I know too much Jewish history. I don't want to give these guys a dime. But there's so many people who say, okay, no, that was long ago. And in the meantime, look at what they're doing for us now. They're so friendly. But there are people who go, but again, the more you learn and the more you are aware of some Jewish history, it's just like, how can I go and enjoy that? I've seen from people who will say that they've gone on Pesach programs that were being run in either Spain or Portugal. Now, again, the expulsion from Spain and Portugal is 500 years ago. But I hate to say it this way, but it's like I think someone can really only enjoy themselves as a Jew in those locales if they're just not aware of Jewish history. Once you start to read about the persecutions, once you start to read about what those nations did to us, it's like, it's one thing if my flight stops there and you want to do a quick thing to go see what the remnants of the Jewish communities, maybe go visit some kvarim, but to say that I want to go and enjoy the country of Spain, I can't do it. And I hear this all the time about people who go back for, let's say, on these trips, these heritage trips to parts of Eastern Europe. I've heard this. And again, like, I've never done this. And like, I just don't have that desire to do it. But I've heard some people say they found it very meaningful. But I've also heard them say they couldn't bring themselves to spend a dime, to enrich anyone. People said, like, we went as a group from Israel and we brought as much of what we could with us. We didn't want to, give a dime to enrich. I can understand that. And some of those feelings there's still some awful feelings there. You hear about groups who go on some of the March for Livings and stuff, and they'll tell you about their experiences they've had with some of the locals there are still pretty ugly experiences and stuff. So it's just, I can't, I've never heard someone say, like, I want to go on a vacation to Poland. That's something I've never heard anyone say, but some of these other locales, you're starting to hear that and you're always scratching your head. It's like, how could you? But anyhow, that's what he's saying. He's saying that's there. I remember a couple of years ago, I think I shared this with the group. I saw something that Portugal was willing to offer citizenship to any Jew who could prove that they had a Sephardic ancestry, and they may have been part of the people who were expelled from Spain and Portugal. And a number of Israelis took them up on that offer because it wasn't that they wanted to move back to Portugal, but they were saying they wanted to have a European Union passport, and that was the easiest way to do that. But I think what Portugal was really hoping for was that people were going to move on back, and this would help revive the economy and stuff, That did move back? Wow.
Well, during the war,
Oh,
as places to go.
during the last 2 years, you mean? And did they stay there? Or just to get out, to get a breather? Yeah.
There were a number of Israelis that went
Wow.
to Portugal.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
in response to what you said, I went on March of the Living way back in 1996.
What was your experience?
I have a million experiences we can talk about later, but the one thing that bothered me so much was I felt exploited.
Yeah.
Every time they took us to one of the camps, or they took us to Krakow, or they took us to Warsaw, everything was a museum.
Oh,
It's a museum,
right.
And and they charge money.
Admission for this.
Admission.
Oh, wow. And that's going to the state.
Auschwitz.
Oh my God. Oh, right.
It bothered me so much.
Right.
And here March of the Living brings thousands of people, kids, adults, everybody, survivors go. And it just the whole time I was there, it just knocked the kishkas out.
Right. To feel like I'm putting any money into this economy. And
all
I know,
over.
I know.
High school kids in
A lot of Israelis schools go on trips and stuff, and some have told me what they try to bring as much as they possibly can with the thought process of we don't want to have to, but it's impossible. You can't possibly bring everything, that, but it's
Once you pay for the ticket over there, you've already started spending.
yeah, yeah,
but it's just
yeah. Yeah. So, but I think this is fascinating. There's what Rav Sorotsky's pointing out is this is human nature. We remember our parting glance. That's what he's saying. Like we remember that parting glance. All it takes is someone to smile at you once, and then and then you could forget the hardship. I mean, there's a little bit of a different angle, but I remember Layla and I when we were first married, we were living in New York, and I don't know what one of her relatives, it could have been my mother-in-law suggested that there was a restaurant that had just opened up. I think it was in Borough Park, and she said it was very nice. So we went one night for dinner, and we had some bizarre experience happened there. Like for example, I think we got served first before some couple that had been there much longer than us, and they were throwing a tantrum like little babies. So I remember the waiter coming out, and it was obviously a mistake on the waiter's part, but the waiter came out and like, how did he mollify him? I'm telling exactly like how he'd mollify kids. And we heard it because they were the next table. He says, they got served first because they're getting like a low class meal. You were preparing such a beautiful special meal for it's gonna take longer though. Okay. Now they stopped like kvetching, but they were like acting like little children. I couldn't believe it. But yeah, but one thing I noticed was there were all these paintings on the walls showing this idyllic imagination of like shtetl life of like little kids with rosy cheeks in nice autumn sitting and fishing in ponds and like I remember saying to Layla, I said they're creating this fantasy world with these portraits on of these paintings on the wall. No one had it good. People were living in dire poverty. Kids were dying left and right from disease and whatnot. And that was when they weren't dealing with running from Cossacks who were trying to lop their heads off and stuff. But look at these, like they're trying to like to portray like it was like Fiddler on the Roof on steroids, like trying to portray this idyllic like no, it was never good. They're like this is no one. You speak to anyone, they'll tell you okay, they have some memories of their childhood because the only happy ones were because they didn't realize just how bad things were. But no one was itching to go back to that. But anyhow, that's sort of like this is that the memory and of the human experience is very fickle, and that's what he's pointing out here. And I think there's a lot to that. All right, that's Devar Torah number one. Let's look at a second one, and this is somewhat related, but this is different. I thought I think it was Rabbi Kurzfeld the other day after Minyan, he pointed something out to me that I totally missed me. If you watched the news, I believe it was Sunday morning. Sunday morning was when they announced it was during Chakras we were davening here, or maybe it was Monday. I don't remember if it was Sunday or Monday that they announced that they had gotten the last Ron Gavili, that they had gotten the remains of the last Israeli who was being held in Gaza, that they had positively identified his remains, and they had they had what's the word? I can't believe I'm forgetting my words. When you dig someone up, I cannot believe I'm forgetting my words. Exhume, or yeah, they interred, or they were going to they exhumed him to reinter him to rebury him in Israel. I can't believe I'm forgetting my words. So and they had positively identified him, and it was such an exhale of relief that so many people felt because the poor family not to know the whereabouts and not to have a kever, So what finally? But Rabbi Crystal came over to me and he says after davening, he goes, "I'm already seeing people are pointing. I think he said this to me at Mincha that people are pointing to me that this is it matches up with our parsha. Why? Because look at this pasuk on page 2. It tells us that what was part and parcel of the Exodus. It says that when they were leaving Mitzrayim, Vayikach Moshe atzmos Yosef imo. Moshe made sure to bring the remains of Yosef with him, the bones of Yosef. He found the sarcophagus that had Yosef's remains in it, and he schlepped it out. And Bnei Israel brought that with them to bring it to Israel. So you should be buried in Israel. Ki hashpeya ishpias Bnei Israel more, because Yosef had made his brothers promise, Pakod yifkod Elokim eschem, that God will surely remember you. Excuse me, v'alisam es atzmos samizeh, Itchem, and I want you to bring my remains out of here with you. So look at that. Look how it matches up. You'll often see this, how current events match up with the Parshas Shavua. And Rabbi Kurzweil pointed out, I said, I can't believe I missed that. That's incredible. Look at that. I would imagine so many people must be making this connection, but that's incredible. So let's look at Rav Sorotzkin has a beautiful observation on this pasuk, and you'll see that it is somewhat related to the first of our Torah. So let's see. He says, Laikach Moshe Satzmos Yosef, that Moshe took the remains of Yosef with him. Besota, and the Gemara in Sota, Darshu, Chazal make the following explanation. Chacham Levi Kach Mitzvos. They point to a pasuk in Mishlei that says, the wise of heart, meaning someone who's really got their head on their shoulders, when they have options about what to do, they should choose mitzvos. And it says, what's an example? Is that Moshe? This Moshe is the ultimate epitome of this. Shekol Yisrael askuba biza. The night before leaving Egypt, the rest of the Jews was knocking on doors asking for gold and silver. But what was Moshe doing? V'hu, Moshe was looking for the Atzmos Yosef. Everyone else is looking to line their pockets, and Moshe is looking for the remains of Yosef. So, but there's an obvious question on this Gemara, and I've seen numerous answers. Remember, this is one of the last commands Hashem gave to Moshe. He says, Dabir Nabaz Ne'am. Please ask the people before they leave. I know they just want to get out of here, but before they leave, knock on the Egyptians' doors and ask for gold and silver, ask for reparations. So they're also doing a mitzvah. Hada Chazal and the Gemara point to Moshe. Moshe had a choice. He could either engage in plunder or looking for Yosef's remains. Chacham Lev Yikach mitzvahs. The wise of heart should take a mitzvah. That's what Moshe did. But the rest of Bnei Israel is doing a mitzvah too, because they were, Hashem had told them to leave with wealth. So why are you almost disparaging Bnei Israel and elevating Moshe? Everyone's doing mitzvahs. So why is Moshe pointing out someone who chose mitzvahs? He goes, even plundering Egypt and taking all that silver and gold, that too was a mitzvah of Hashem. But so the way there's many answers to this. The way Rav Sorotzkin wants to say it is, you know what was different about Moshe? Moshe had no personal gain out of getting the remains of Yosef. Yes, everyone else was doing a mitzvah, but at the end of the day, can you tell me that it was absolutely altruistic? Asking for reparations. Yeah, that is a mitzvah. Was it altruistic? Were you doing that lishma? I'm doing that for no other reason other than the reason that God asked me? Or are you doing this because, wow, yeah, that silver will look nice in my eventual break front? That's what you're thinking. Come on, you're going to tell me that there were such tzaddikim? Moshe, however, when he's looking for the remains of Yosef, there's no personal gain that could come out of that. That's the way Rav Sorotzkin's answering this. Yosef, as opposed to busying himself to finding the bones, the remains of Yosef. So he says that's that. But then he points out that even though there was no personal gain from this, there was communal gain from having the remains of Yosef with them all the years in the Midbar. And that's what he says. Movad zeh, and he's going to say Movad zeh, but aside from the fact that what we just said, hashpia Yosef es bnei Yisrael kachas atzmos osam, is that Yosef also, before he died, he made Bnei Yisrael promise that they would bring his remains out. Ubishvua namar, when it comes to fulfilling an oath, it says in the Torah, lo yinakeh, that you can't absolve yourself. So, in other words, even though it was totally altruistic, but, Moshe still had to do this on behalf of the Jewish people because the Jewish people was committed to bringing Yosef out. So maybe that was, even though, in other words, another thing that was positive here is that you're right, everything is a mitzvah. But this was even a bigger mitzvah because this was a nationwide promise that they had entered into. So that's the second answer. He goes, and now he says, but not just that. Now he's going to say, having the remains of Yosef with them served many benefits for the Jewish people in the wilderness. And he's going to give us, I think, 3. So let's see what he says here. Elsewhere, I went on to explain, and I think we looked at this in a previous year. Elsewhere, I went on to explain as Harav Tov, all of the benefits, Shayat Safun Batzmos Yosef, that was really hidden in Bnei Yisrael having the remains of Yosef with them, Yisrael B'Midbar, while they were in the wilderness. I'm briefly going to, because I went on a much greater length elsewhere that I think we did look at one year, but he says, now I'm just going to briefly restate what were the 3 main benefits, he says, that the Bnei Yisrael had from having the remains of Yosef with them all the years in the wilderness. Number 1, Ha'umos laratzu l'kabelas haTorah, the nations of the world. Remember, we have this idea that before God gave the Jewish people the Torah, it says, the Medrash says that he first offered it to the nations of the world, and they all said, "No, no, that's too difficult for us. We can't get fulfill that, so we don't want it." So ha'umos, the other nations of the world, shalaratzu l'kabelas haTorah, did not want to accept the Torah. But Taina, they had the following objection. They said, "She neged teva adam." This is going against human nature. The stuff you're asking us to do, or the stuff you're asking us in the Torah to stay away from, that's fighting human nature. Sheina misugal iskaber al tevoso. A person can't overcome their temptations. Asuroshim al gama b'nei Israel. That complaint started to have an effect on the Jewish people. When we start hearing that all the other nations of the world found the area of the Torah that was just too challenging for them and their nature, so the Jewish people might start to think, well, 1 second, how could we say Nasa v'nishma? Accepting the Torah is going to ask us to overcome our inclinations. But then they took a look and they said, 1 second, look who's amongst us. We have the remains of Yosef, and that gave them the slap upside the head that they needed, because they look at Yosef, and Yosef reminds them that it is possible. It is possible. We can overcome our nature, and we can, even if what the Torah asks of us might be against our inclinations, we can be stronger. We have the ability to be, we say in Perkei Eze Gibor, who's really mighty, Hakovish Es Yitzro, someone who's able to subdue, someone who's able to attain mastery over their inclinations, over their desires, over their passions. That's a true mighty person. And who could look at? We could say Yosef. We know that Yosef did this, and he's right here amongst us. We have a sarcophagus right there. That'll inspire all of us that it is possible to do this. So that's what he says. El Shebo Atzmos Yosef. They took one look at the remains of Yosef, and that sets them straight. Ubez Aronos, and Chazal tell us there were two caskets, there were two chests that accompanied us in the wilderness. Our own Bris Hashem, we had the ark that had the luchos in it, Va'aronos Shel Yosef, and we had a second ark, the casket that had the remains of Yosef. Shaya Mahalchim Zebetzad Zeh, Mem Shana B'Midbar. All 40 years in the wilderness, they were kept, when they would travel, they were in close proximity to one another. Hechrizu, and this would cause Bnei Yisrael to announce, Kayem Zeh, Mashakasa Bazeh. The one in this box, meaning Yosef, he fulfilled everything that's in this box, meaning the luchos, all of the mitzvahs. And that gave the inspiration that Bnei Yisrael needed, that it is possible. This isn't just for immortals. This is possible for human beings. Even someone like Yosef could overcome his challenges. We could do it too. And this gave instructions to everyone. In the second column, B'Yitzro, a person really could overcome their temptations. The Torah wasn't given to angels, and even human beings who were created with passion, created with lusts. We could still overcome them. We have the ability. So that was benefit number one for having Yosef's remains in the midst of Klal Yisrael. He inspires Bnei Yisrael. Whenever we just take a look, we say it is possible. A human being has the ability to be kovish as Yisro, to subdue, to overcome their inclinations, their desires, and that was benefit number one. Now he says, I'll tell you a second benefit that we had the Atzmos Yosef Beis. B'Shoshem Bnei Yisrael, whenever Bnei Yisrael decided there was a branch within the Jewish people during the years in the wilderness who got fed up and lost their faith in God, and they said, Tov lanu avodas Mitzrayim, we'd be better off being slaves back in Egypt. Oh, or they might say, Nitna Rosh v'Neshuva Mitzrayim, appoint a leader and we'll return to Egypt. Be'emuna, she'acharei kavod, because what did they believe? That after the kavod, after the dignity, shechoku lem b'yitziasam, b'yitzesam, how much dignity we received when we left. This is how it relates back to the first of our Torah, is that when we left, Paro personally escorted us out. The Egyptians sent us off nicely. They gave us money. So that may have warped people's thinking into thinking that maybe it's not so bad to go back to Egypt. Whenever we might start getting carried away with that idea, So therefore, basically looking at the remains of Yosef will set us straight. So he says, we'll start to think, Shachrei HaKavod Shechol Kulam B'Tzeisam, after the dignity the Egyptians showed us and respect they showed us when we left, Yisnagu Atayim Ka'am Anashim. If we would return now, maybe they'll treat us like citizens. They'll treat us like human beings. They'll treat us like people again. Herala Moshe El Aron Zelimor. Moshe would say, one second, guys. Before you get carried away with this idea that the Egyptians might be nice to you, let's remember who's in that casket there. Let's remember Yosef and what the story of Yosef was. Ruas HaGamul. Look at the reward Shagamlu of Mitzrayim Yosef. How nicely did the Egyptians treat Yosef? Shehitzil Osami Misas Ra'av. Yosef was personally responsible for saving that entire nation from dying in a famine. Ve'ashir es kol medina. He caused them to become wealthy because he put this whole plan together, how they would stock up food and they would sell it to the whole region, not just the Egyptians, but to everyone. Ve'afal piked, and with all that, hevidu beferach es achav. They still made his kinsmen, his family, his brothers, into slaves, vicious labor. Even Yosef's own children and his offspring, who they were invited to Egypt. Remember, Paro had invited them to all come there. And that's how they were treated. So just take a look at that casket. How could you possibly think? How could you have any faith in a nation that has such feelings of a lack of appreciation to people who do good to them? If they're not going to show any appreciation, they're going to be a kafay tov, they're going to be ingrates to Yosef. What kind of treatment do you hope for in Mitzrayim? So that was the second benefit that Bnei Yisrael had by having the remains of Yosef with them all those years in the wilderness. Whenever a sizable chunk of people might really think about going back to Mitzrayim, all Moshe had to do was say, guys, let's just remember a little Jewish history. We have a sarcophagus here of Yosef. What do we know about Yosef? Let's go through his story. What did he do for Egypt? And yet, what did they do in return? How good do you think you're going to be treated? You want to put faith in that people? And that could say, oh, yeah, good point. So that was the second benefit they had out of having the remains of Yosef with them all those years in the wilderness. And now he says, Gimel, what's the third benefit? He says, Yotze Mitzrayim chashvuas atzmam la'avadim. The immediate generation who left Egypt, they really had a slave mentality. It's very difficult to undo a slave mentality because it gets so deep into the psyche. It's so deep in there. And he says, Ubnei Avdei Olam, and they viewed themselves as that no matter how much time goes on, we were born slaves, we were treated like slaves, we're never going to get it out of our system. V'zakfuas komasama kfufa rak lamara. Even when they could straighten up their broken backs and stand up straight, what allowed them to do that? Rak lamara arona shel Yosef, only by seeing the casket of Yosef. Shalachu Moshe, that Moshe took that, he liberated his sarcophagus. Mikapatilon shel malachim. He says, where did I get it from? From the burial center of where they would keep kings. Yosef was treated by the Egyptians of royalty, and he's our family member. So he's basically saying to everyone, you have yichus. Anyone who's ever feeling like an Eved, you're not an Eved. You're a descendant of princes. Look who's here with us. We have the royal sarcophagus of Yosef. The Shahid Lahem, Shem B'nai Malachim. He can let them all, you're all royalty. Stop thinking of yourself as a slave. Umotzam Mirozne Aretz. And by doing that, he brought them out of the lowly, he brought them up, he brought them out of whatever low feelings they had, and B'nai Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and would inspire them to live as children of our great patriarchs, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and our holy mothers, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. But they needed something tangible to remind themselves that we're better than this. We're not just slaves. We're not runaway slaves. We are royalty. And by having that sarcophagus with them, that's what reminded them. So I think this is a beautiful piece in Rosh Hashanah. And you see what I was saying about how his second explanation dovetails with the first of our Torah that we saw. So again, just in review, what did Rosh Hashanah say in this? Is that that Moshe took the remains of Yosef with him, and we said that the Gemara says he was doing a mitzvah while the others weren't. Well, what does that mean? They were also doing a mitzvah. So his first idea was to say that, yeah, but this was totally altruistic. There was nothing personal in this. And then he goes on to explain, and he says the second reason because they had a national oath to Yosef, so therefore that was more important than, let's say, the individual biza, the plundering they were doing. But what he really spends time here is saying that explaining and reminding us there were three incredible benefits that Bnei Israel had for experienced by having the Aron, the sarcophagus, the casket of Yosef with them all those years in the wilderness. Number one, he would inspire them that it is possible to overcome our inclinations. We have testimony. Here's someone we know did that. That's Yosef. The whole incident with the wife of Potiphar reminded him that. The whole idea that he could remain righteous even so far from his family, that could inspire everyone. And then number two, if they ever started to think that life could be better back in Egypt, all Moshe had to do was remind them of the story of Yosef and how terribly the Egyptians treated him and how they were such ingrates for all that Yosef had done for them, and that would dash those plans of anyone who wanted to go back to Egypt. And number three, this would help inspire anyone who was feeling like a runaway slave and couldn't break free from slave mentality. This could go ahead and make everyone realize that you're not slaves. You're descendants of royalty. I just want to share one last item with you before we go on to this last of our Torah. Is that years ago I bought a book. I have it at home. It's a fascinating book. Is that during the Great Depression, the government came up with many plans to try to put some money in people's pockets. We're all familiar with the state park system and much of the national park system that's built. A lot of the work, the labor that went into that, correct, CCC was a civilian conservation corps that was put together. It was almost like military style units that were doing all this work. When you visit a national park and a state park, a lot of in state forests also, a lot of those roads that were built and a lot of the old cabins, again, the newer ones you could clearly see are new, but the original ones were built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. That was a government plan to put people to work. I have a book at home that I didn't even know this existed. Not everyone was strong enough to be out there on these working crews. So they also had writers who were out of work, and they came up with different plans, government projects to get them writing. What artists as well. So one plan that came up with writers was that they said, one second, we're in the Great Depression. This is like the 1920s. That's about 60 years since the end of slavery. There still are some people who were born into slavery who are still living. We need them interviewed, and we need to archive. We need to document their stories and what they remember, so this won't be lost. And a number of them were sent to find freed slaves, or again, this is 60 years after. So again, some of these were people who grew up as children as slaves, and to just hear some of their stories and document it. So I have a slim book at home, which is a selection. Apparently, this one came out in several volumes. It's probably in the Library of Congress somewhere, the complete work. I have at home, it must just be excerpts from this, short accounts. It's a paperback. It was called When I Was a Slave. That's what I think. I don't remember. I think I found it on Amazon once when I heard about this. And it's fascinating. These are firsthand accounts where they're sitting down and interviewing people who had grown up in slavery. And I remember, because we talk about slave mentality, there were some of them who were basically saying that here it was 60 years later, and they were living as dirt poor sharecroppers at that point, and they were saying, you know what? Not all of them. Some of them were saying, I had a really nice master, and my life was actually better. My life was actually better. And it's like so sad because you're thinking, but now you've got personal autonomy and you've got that. It's not easy to break out of slave mentality. And some of them that they were interviewing, again, even what they were saying, the injustices that they experienced, it was almost like they were just saying as a matter of factly, not a sense of bitterness or something, because they were just raised that this is what to expect. It's really it's a window into when we talk about slave mentality, just to see like what some of these people, what the recollections were. It's not what I guess like what Hollywood would imagine what they would be saying. It wasn't okay. There were some that I saw in that volume of people saying about the horrible injustices they faced, but others were just saying matter of factly, and others were almost lamenting the fact that, I had a really good master and he took care of me and my family. Now I'm left to fend for myself, and I'm not doing as well. It was just to me, it was like a real window into what slave mentality was. Yeah.
We were in 1985. I had an experience that has stayed in my mind ever since, and I can picture it. I was walking down Poplar, and I think I was walking with one of my kids, and they were very young then. And coming in this direction was an older black man.
Yeah.
Right? And he stepped off of the sidewalk
To let you pass?
onto the road
Yeah.
with his head down.
Wow.
Until he passed me.
This is from segregation, probably.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
And I was very active in the civil rights movement for years. For years, I was active. This was the first time I ever lived in the South.
Yeah.
And
how old of a man was this?
What?
This was an elderly man?
Elderly man.
Wow.
He had gray hair. He was stooped, very thin, stooped over. And I thought to I was so appalled.
Well, he couldn't get it out of his system.
That, you know,
he just didn't want trouble.
Correct.
That was his attitude. He just didn't want trouble. So
right. It's something that becomes ingrained. You know? It's you can call it slave mentality, you can call it response mentality to, things that, this is how I grew up in this. You come to a white lady, you don't look her in the face,
and you step out of the way. And and he's thinking, even if by law I don't have to, it's safer to I'll avoid all problems if I do this, Wow. And you experienced this. Oh, wow.
I just couldn't believe it. And I didn't want to do anything to upset the man.
Right.
If I went up to talk to him, he probably would have gotten scared over.
Right.
So, I just
wow. Again, but that didn't happen in a vacuum. That happened as a kid being taught, avoid all problems, be safe. Wow.
The story, Mississippi burning, and the kid from Chicago who comes down to Mississippi, and thinks it's okay to talk to some white
in the elevator. Right.
People live through that.
Wow.
So.
Oh, that's really wild that you experienced it.
Yeah, it's hard to break away from your mentality.
100%. It's been ingrained from the youngest days, and it's very hard to. By the way, some of the commentaries say, there's the 4 expressions of geula.
Yeah.
And I think I don't remember which of the Mefarshim was. It says this about. I think it's Vilakachti, and the 4th one is that the gift was that basically they'll no longer view themselves as avadim borchim, as runaway slaves. In other words, it could have been they will be free, but their mentality for the rest of their life was to view themselves as a runaway slave. This was to purge that idea out of their mind that no, you're not a runaway slave. It's not. It doesn't happen on its own. Without that like heavenly intervention. Almost sounds like it's those are lasting effects. They don't just go away. Wow. I don't know if we'll have time for this last one, but just to speak it outside, just to speak this outside is that what we have here is, do you have time? We'll just do this inside. Okay, so we'll do this inside. So when Paro hears that they've run away, he now wants to encourage everyone to chase after the Jews, and that leads to their, following them into the Split Sea where they're drowned. His army's drowned. So it says, "Vayugad lamelech Mitzrayim ki barach ha'am." It's told to the king of Egypt that the people has fled. Vayafech levav Paro v'avadev elam. So now their hearts turn to. They have a change of heart. How they feel about the people, about the Jews. Vayomru, and they say, "Mazos asinu, what have we done? Ki shalachnu es Yisrael me'avdenu, that we sent them, that we released them from serving us." Vayasuras rechbo. So he personally harnesses his chariot. V'esamo lakachimo, and he brings everyone with him. So they have this massive change of heart. So look what he says. The pasuk says, and I never really caught this before I saw Sorotzkin pointing this out. Ki shalachnu esam me'avdenu. What's their big regret? That we sent the Jews away, that they're no longer our slaves. That's the regret. So he says, Mizer Raya, this is a proof, L'divrei Gavia ben Pesisa, and we'll see the Gemara in a second. This proves that which Gavia ben Pesisa is a person in the Gemara, what he said, Shatan Lefnei Alexander Muktan, who argued before Alexander the Great, Alexander of Macedonia, we'll see what that means. Shavoda Samach Ribo Bnei Yisrael, Shava Yoser Me'akesef Ezav, is that the work of 600,000 adult males, and that being the backbone of the Egyptian economy, which was based on that slave labor, that was worth far more than the silver and the gold that we took. that we took from Egypt. Shaharei, because look, what did Paro say to everyone? He didn't say we got to chase after them because they took our gold and silver. He says we just lost our labor force. So in other words, the labor force was more valuable than the loss of their riches, of their gold and silver. Shaharei Mitzrim lo hisonenu al kesef v'zav. Here, Paro and the Egyptians, they're not complaining about, whoa, what did we do? We just gave away all our silver and gold. Rak al havadim. They're saying we no longer have our slaves. The slaves were the absolute backbone of the Egyptian economy. Shenavdulam. They now lost that whole thing, that whole piece of their economy. Kishalachnu es Yisrael me'avdeinu. Because what did they say? We released the Jews from serving us. That was the biggest problem that they had. It wasn't the gold and silver. So that means what's worth more? The labor was worth more than the gold and silver they took. So even though we got reparations, the reparations don't even add up to what we experienced. That's what he's saying. So what's this Gemara about Gavia ben Pesisa that he's referring to? It's an astonishing Gemara. It's in Sanhedrin, and you'll see it there on the bottom of page 3. The Gemara is talking about someone, a very wise Jew who was not one of the great rabbis, but just a very clever Jew by the name of Gavia ben Pesisa. At the time of the Gemara, who was living at the time of Alexander the Great. So he would have been at the time of the Tanoim, but he was not one of the great rabbis. Just a very wise Jew living at the time that Alexander the Great was the conqueror of the known world. So, and it talks about several very intelligent things that this Gavia ben Pesisa did, and some of them have to do with defending the Jews so to say, in the UN of the time, which was the court of Alexander. Various complaints were lodged against them, and the very smart way that he defended the Jewish people. So let's see. Shuv Pamachas, there was another incident. Bo B'nai Mitzrayim, the residents of Egypt, descendants of the Egyptians, they came Ladonim Yisrael Lifnei Alexander Mukdan. They came before Alexander of Macedonia, Alexander the Great. They came before his great court, and they wanted to wage a lawsuit against the Jews. Amrulo, they said to Alexander, Hareyu Omer, this people in their Torah, it says, and they quote the chapter and verse, V'Hashem nasan eschena b'nei Mitzrayim ve'yashilum, is that God put the grace into the eyes of the Egyptians towards the Jews, and they gave them their gold and silver. Tenu lanu kesef v'zav shenitaltu mimenu. We're here to sue you. We want our money back. Amar Gavia ben Pesisa. That was the complaint, and now Alexander obviously sends a message to the Jews. How are you guys going to defend yourself? So Gavia ben Pesisa hears about this, and he says to the Chachamim, Tenu li rishus, give me permission, ve'elech v'adon imahen lefnei Alexandros. Give me permission, and I will defend the Jewish people in the court of Alexander. And he says, it's a smart idea to send me. Why? Im yinatzchuni, if they defeat me, so then Amru Lam, the great sages can respond, come on, that wasn't a real defeat. Hedjot Shabanu Nitzachtem. You just defeated one of our commoners, and now give us a chance. So in other words, I'll be your first line of defense. That way, if I lose, you could always say, you didn't really beat us. This wasn't one of the sages. Vimania Natseach Osam, but if I could come up with a way to show how Bnei Yisrael is in the right, and I win, Amrulam, then you could say Torah's Moshe Rabbeinu Nitzachtem, that it's the Torah of Moshe that won. And if this commoner could defeat the argument, of course the sages could. So Nasnu Lorishus, they gave him permission. They said, yeah, that makes sense, is that you'll be our first line of defense. We'll send Gavia ben Pesisa. Because again, he's already proved himself to have a lot of seichel. So Nasnu Lorishus, they gave him permission, V'halach v'dani man. And he goes to represent the Jewish people in the court of Alexander. Amar Lahen, and here's what he says back. He says, okay, Egyptians, you've got a complaint against the Jewish people that we owe you gold and silver. Where are you bringing any proof to the fact that we plundered your gold and silver? Amrulo, they said back to him, you silly Jew, mina Torah. It's in your Torah. So he says, oh, you're looking to our Torah as a proof text? Amar lahen, he says back to them, afani lo avi lachem raya min haTorah. So me too, I'm also going to defend the Jews, and I'll bring another proof from the Torah. Shenemar, it says in the Torah, Umoshav b'nei Yisrael asher yashvu b'Mitzrayim, in this week's Parsha, how long did the Jews spend in Egypt? Shloshim shana v'arba me'o shana, 430 years. Tenu lanu schar avoda shal shishim ribo. So we would like, if you're looking for our Torah, for the history of what went went on. We want reparations. We want reparations for 600,000 adult males, sheshibadatem b'Mitzrayim, that you enslaved in Egypt, shloshim shana v'arba me'ot shana, for 430 years. Oh, okay, good, guys. You're using the Torah? That's where you're saying we took gold and silver? Oh, if the Torah is your text as to the history of the relationship between the Jews and the Egyptians, so we want even more than this. Meaning, this is what Rav Saratsky is referring to. Obviously, Gavia ben Pasisa is saying is that the value of 600,000 slaves working for the Egyptians is worth far more than whatever gold and silver they took. So that was his argument back. So Amar Lahan Alexander says, "Ooh, I like this Gavia. This is a pretty wise Jew. I like what he just did there." Amar Lahan Alexander's Mukdan. So Alexander of Macedonia says to the Egyptians, "Hechziru lo tshuva." What's your response? He's got a very good point. Amru lo, they responded in turn, Tnu lanu zman shlosha yamim. Give us 3 days to formulate a response. Nasan lem zman, and he gave them those 3 days. Badku v'lo matzu tshuva, and they did their best, but they never came up with an answer, how to answer back Gavia ben Pasisa. Miyad, so what was Alexander's reaction? Hinichus deoseyem kishen zros or karmein kishen natos ubarchu. They left all their fields in full, I guess in full, before the harvest. They hadn't yet been harvested. They were in full bloom of all of their grains, and they just abandoned them because they were so scared that Alexander's going to take them. So now Alexander said, "Okay, Jews, you said you're owed even more than the gold and silver you took. You have full rights to all of their produce." And it says, "V'osa shana shvius haisa," and this worked out very good for the Jews because there happened to have been a Shemitah year. It was a Shemitah year where they couldn't make use and sell the produce in the land of Israel, and now Egypt basically gave them a full year's bounty of stuff. So that's how that played itself out. So Alexander the Great is, think about that, that is the time of the Greek Empire, and that is before the Roman Empire. So it's in the second Beis Hamikdash, and the second Beis Hamikdash is about, I'm going to say, close to 1,000 years after the Exodus. So this is a bunch of years later that this is all happening here. So this is what Rav Saratsky is referring to. He says this observation that he has in the Chumash is by the fact that how did Paro get everyone to rise up? It wasn't that, hey, they took our gold and silver. It was like, we just lost all our slaves, meaning having that many slaves as the backbone economy was worth more than their gold and silver, because otherwise they would have complained about their gold and silver.
Pick the strawberries. How much are they going
to? Exactly. Now, I just want to share this last thing with you. This is priceless. You talk about how history repeats itself. This was an article I remember seeing a number of years ago. I can't believe it. It's 22 years ago now. I saw this article was in the forward about an Egyptian scholar who was planning a lawsuit over Exodus gold. Let's read it together. It says, a prominent Egyptian legal scholar is preparing a lawsuit against the Jews around the world over gold allegedly stolen in biblical times. And he was preparing this, this guy apparently was a dean of some law school in Egypt. Just to, you'll read the article yourself, but what basically is, this is the Gemara playing itself out again. That, again, he wants to take this before some world body. He doesn't say if it's the UN or where it is, but he wants to basically prepare a lawsuit against Israel, saying is that now we want interest, because now it's over 2,000 years have gone by, and we want interest, all that silver and gold, and we want to figure out how much it was, and interest, and with this, we want to bankrupt the state of Israel. That's this lawsuit he's preparing. So let's just go towards the end. You'll see the last 3 paragraphs. It says there, Carmen said if he had read the Al Aram article on April Fool's Day, he would have assumed it was a joke. But it's reality. This publication is like the Egyptian equivalent of a Sunday New York Times insert. It's a serious publication. Hillman did not specify where he planned to file suit, but should the case ever reach a courtroom, Alan Dershowitz, a Harvard law professor and author of The Case for Israel, told the Ford, I'd be happy to defend the Jews, calling Hilmy a clown, who obviously knows only a little bit of law. Dershowitz said that the scholar's ridiculous suit invites a countersuit from the Jews over reparations for their enslavement in Egypt. Such a countersuit, Dershowitz said, could also be calculated in the trillions of dollars. It would expose the oppressive life the Jews led under Egyptian slavery. That's exactly what Gavia ben Pasisa did. So here's Dershowitz, which I don't even know if he ever learned that Gemara in Sotah or not, but the logic is right there. Oh, you're looking at our Torah as the source that we took your gold and silver. So we'll look at our Torah and we'll talk about the miserable slavery that we had, and that's a countersuit, and that's worth even more. I couldn't believe it when I saw this article. I was like, this is the Gemara. It's like the more things change, the more they stay the same. There it is. But anyhow, I bring this all in because this is what Rav Sorotzkin is pointing out. His observation from this pasuk is a proof to what Gavia ben Pesisa, what his thinking was. By the fact that Paro tells the Egyptians, how did he rile them up to go chase the Jews? Was, oh no, we just lost our slaves. He didn't say, oh no, we lost our gold and silver. So what does that show is worth more? That incredible slave labor force. So I thought that was fascinating. So it's 3 different Divrei Torah on the Parsha. I hope this can enhance your appreciation of the Parsha this week. And I thank everyone for joining, both online and in person too. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to end the recording. If anyone has anything they want to add, please feel free to do so.